investing. How about cryptocurrency or maybe starting your own business? You're watching The Sovereign Life with Teresa Stewart on Channel 82.
Today I have two great guests with me. We are going to be talking about the fact that real estate is more than just buying and selling. I have Ben Rigo, who is a real estate advisor. I also have Daniel Woods, who is a real estate consultant. And guys, we have Monopoly on the table here, so I really want to just dive straight into the fact that there are a lot of misconceptions around real estate, that Monopoly may or may not have been played a hand in that. So share with me some of the misconceptions you guys have seen or have heard from clients or just even in the industry in general.
Well, thank you, Terry, for having us. And certainly Monopoly is our favorite game. We play that almost every day. My son plays it every day before he goes to bed. Pennsylvania Avenue, I've always been eyeing that one up. But when you think about real estate, there's a lot of misconceptions, certainly in Bermuda. I think one that comes to mind is about financing. And often, let's say if you bank with HSBC, for example, someone thinks that you have to actually go to HSBC to look to get your loan. But really, I always tell people to sort of play the field, go to Clarion, go to Butterfield, and you actually might get better rates that way. And you might find that, home ownership is more realistic than one might think. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of it for me. Daniel, any?
Nice. From my point of view, I'd say I think a common misconception is that generally you are scared to make an offer on a property just because you think it's out of reach or out of touch. Real estate all comes down to negotiation. You don't know what the other party is thinking. You don't know, where their head's at and why the number is the number. Situations change. So sometimes it doesn't generally hurt just to sort of say, this is my best shot. And ask. The worst thing that could happen is someone say, no thanks. Right. So, yeah.
There's no such thing as a bad offer.
Yeah.
Really, in the end.
So.
And that's interesting. So Ben, when you mentioned banking, I know you guys had an episode on Keys on the Rock where you actually spoke with a banking consultant. And so one of the things I wanted to talk, because you just shared, if I have an account with HSBC, that's generally right, my loyalty kind of lies.
Exactly.
What are some of the things that we don't think about when we're getting ready to purchase or even sell a home where the bank is concerned? What are some of the things that we might just not even be thinking about as a first-time home buyer or seller or even someone who's been in the game for a while?
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about banking and financing, everything is subject to an appraisal. So if you place an offer, let's say a house is priced at $1 million, you place an offer at $900,000 or something like that. If that appraisal, an asking price can be whatever a seller chooses, right? An agent, we can always give our advice on that price, but ultimately the seller sets the price. If you have an accepted offer, let's say at $900,000, it's subject to financing, so then the bank will get an appraiser to go to the property. That appraiser might deem that the property is worth $800,000. So really everything is subject to financing, so I think further to what Daniel said, don't be scared off by asking prices, and that everything really is reliant on what the appraiser is going to say, which Daniel obviously has experience in doing as well.
And so Daniel, when you mentioned, shooting your shot with your offer, what are some things that people don't even consider when they are shooting that shot, with that offer? Because there's you just mentioned appraisal. That's not what people think about when they're getting ready to buy a home. They just think, I'm just paying to buy the home and that's it. There's not these other fees or costs that kind of come into it. So what are some things we should be thinking about when we're setting our offer amount?
So when you're setting your offer amount, you definitely want to have the amount in mind that you actually want to pay for the house, but then you also want to consider all the other factors, such as closing costs would be a major one. The deposit is another major one. So these are sort of factors that you have to have in the back of your head because they do add up, and you do need, quite a decent amount or a percentage of cash on hand that you're going to have to use to deal with these prices. But generally speaking, you just have to have the idea of sort of why you're going after it, and never really get your hopes too high or your hopes too low on a property, and just flow with it, really.
And further to that, I think, so for a first-time buyer, if you're a Bermudian first-time buyer and you're buying a property that ultimately the sales price is at $750,000 or lower, you actually get exempt from paying stamp duty. So, and the seller does as well. So that is one of the closing costs, which is significant, and a lot of people aren't aware of that. So that is something that the government implemented maybe 4 years ago, something like that.
More than that.
4 or 5 years ago. And so that's tremendous. And again, for a seller, that's actually a better offer because they also save on the stamp duty exemption too.
So thinking of myself, I'm gonna use myself as an example. I don't have a home now, but we know that home ownership, or not even home ownership, property in general is a great way to transfer wealth within a family or even within a community. Now, with the number of the actual price. It's not just $10. It's, it's a pretty significant financial purchase.
Ben has one for $10.
I do.
Well, Ben, we'll talk after this.
I know.
We'll definitely have a conversation after this. But when you, as a first-time interest in property, what are some of the things I should be considering to get myself to feel confident that I'm going to go into this space and actually be able to make a decision that's sound for me? Like, what would be like the number one tip?
So I would say it generally starts with just sort of having your ducks in a row on your end. So you want to have all of your expenses and all of your incomes and have those all laid out to where you know exactly where you stand. Take that to the bank, get yourself in a position where you know what your budget is, pre-approved. Further to that, I would have talks with family who might already have property or someone who can actually lend a helping hand, in a sense, especially as a first-time buyer, someone who can lend a helping hand to help you with the, say, down payment. Because when they're asking 20% of $1 million or 20% of 750, 600, whatever number you want to do, 30% of some banks, that's not a little bit of change, versus other jurisdictions where it might be a little bit more attainable to, where you don't need a down payment or,
it's like 5 or 10% in the States,
So I would say just sort of have those ducks in a row. And what you can often do at most banks now, you can sort of use like a springboard or use someone else's property as collateral. And that can essentially work as the down payment for a set term, like 5 years, to say, until that part of the loan is paid off, mortgage is paid off. And then you can use that to sort of act as your down payment. So that would be my first tips.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and further to that, so when you go and get your pre-approval, again, I would recommend going to all the banks. They might pre-approve you with different mortgage rates or different levels depending on, your assets and your income and everything like that. But that typically lasts for 6 months. So in 6 months' time, let's say it's 6 months and a day, your pre-approval technically is not in place, so you would have to get that renewed. And again, in that 6 months, if you've changed jobs or if you save some money, you could actually get a higher pre-approval. So it's good to stay on top of that. It isn't a requirement to placing an offer, but given what the industry is doing now, it's so, as Daniel says, put your ducks in a row, because a seller is going to look more favorably on your offer if you are organized and they know with confidence that you'd be able to purchase that price or you'd be supported at that purchase price. Otherwise, it's just like plucking a number out of the air and saying, okay, well now I got this accepted offer, now I'm going to go talk to the banks. And it's like, really, like, are you actually, gonna be able to proceed? So.
Okay, so we're gonna take a break right here because I feel like we've covered a lot and I do want to dive even deeper when we come back. So we're gonna take a quick commercial break and then we'll be right back with this episode of The Sovereign Life.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Crimson Multimedia is a full-service video production company. We can take your next project from concept to completion. We produce small one-camera setups to complex large-scale multi-camera productions. We offer editing, visual effects, and file transfers. We also broadcast and live stream both free and pay-per-view events. Visit our website at www.crimsonmultimedia.bm for a quote or to contact us. Let Crimson Multimedia film, edit, broadcast, and stream your next event.
You're watching The Sovereign Life with Teresa Stewart on Channel 82.
Welcome back to this episode of The Sovereign Life. I am here with Ben and Dan. Well, Ben Rigo and Daniel was. I was gonna say like Ben and Daniel was like that's actually not his last name.
Kind of the same.
Kind of the same person, but not really. So we were talking about, there are some myths out there that exist in the real estate world, and we've seen. Well, I know I have seen on TV. There's a lot of great programs in the U.S. where you can flip a home, you can get a home with no money down. I mean, Dan, you mentioned earlier like there is an opportunity if you don't necessarily have the capital, the 20%, the 30%. To get into a program. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that and like what kind of things people can look towards doing in that space?
So the three options that I would say that people in those situations should sort of look to would be the first one that I mentioned, which was try to find someone who can entrust you to sort of help you out with the down payment, whether that's in collateral or cash, and have an agreement and, make that situation work. Another thing would be look at group economics, all right? So if you can sort of find 5 of your mates and you guys all have the same goal in mind, you guys all spoke together, save up, buy something, put some, sweat labor, sweat equity into it, and fix up a house or whatever. That's an opportunity right there in itself. Another thing is, I know government usually has some programs between BHC, and I know Clarion was doing something at one point where you almost have like a home start program. So you can essentially buy a property and you're just paying the financing. So you're just paying the mortgage, and they remove the down payment aspect from it. I'll have to clarify on that, but I think that opportunity is still available. So that would be sort of how I would promote it to anyone who's in that situation and looking to sort of get onto the property market.
And I think real estate has become so popular on these different, HGTV, Bravo, all these sorts of things. And in terms of flipping, it isn't really as achievable in Bermuda to actually make a profit because, we have concrete walls. It's not like, Daniel and I can run through a wall and, it's drywall. Everything can be, cleaned out in a weekend. We say, move that bus and it moves and the house is different. You know what I mean? So it's in Bermuda, unless you're really a contractor and you can do things at cost, it is super expensive. Our closing costs as well, as we sort of alluded to before, those are really high compared to other places. So flipping is very difficult. Also, we don't, even though the market now is a lot better than it's been in years past, but typically, the wait time on the market, it's not like you put something on and in the States, in most markets, there's going to be 30, 40 tours within an open house or something. Yeah. So that isn't really as achievable. I think that is sort of a myth in a way.
Yeah.
Right.
The cost of construction versus the cost that it would take for someone to purchase, it just doesn't, the scales don't balance.
Yeah.
In terms of
the margins of what you're going to potentially achieve are minimal.
But that being said, it can still be done, if you have the skill set yourself and you can do a lot of things at cost, which I know, and that's sort of what I was alluding to with the group economics, the group of people who each bring a skill set, they could probably offer something in that capacity. So.
Right.
And I think that makes sense to, as we've touched upon many times as well, that, if you consult with a real estate agent and you have someone who you trust and they know sort of your goals of what you're looking to do, whether that is to flip or just buy a house for your family, people like Daniel and myself can look into the industry and look for those opportunities because even though prices, especially over the last few years, have been going up, the Bermuda real estate market, just as any market, is always going up in, peaks and valleys. So, we can find those sort of hidden gems that perhaps due to seller motivation might be willing to sell at a lower price than typical. So.
Right. You mentioned HGTV. I am an HGTV fan. I love to see those renos where they just knock the home down and it's this brand new home. Bermuda has a lot of old structures, and a lot of those old structures are not really fit for purpose when you think as a millennial what you kind of want in your home. So can we talk about renos? Like, what are some of the things that one should be thinking about if they want to do a renovation, if they want to buy a property and they are going in with the intent to reno? What are some of the costs around renos?
Why? I just renovated my house.
You can jump right on this.
It took about 9 months. It was supposed to take, it was about 5-6 months initially, was what we were quoted at. And in this world, especially with COVID and, supplies and things, the cost of lumber, half the materials probably we bring, at least half we bring from abroad. So all of that's gone up. There's delays and everything associated. So if you're looking at a property that you have interest in renovating, which, as you say, most properties are in need of that, in the way that millennials like to live, we all like open floor plan and super modern spaces. So with that being said, I would always advise bringing a contractor before you make an offer, or even during the contract phase after you've had an acceptance, or even a structural engineer. So you can have an offer subject to a structural survey. That basically gives you like an out clause if you find out that even if you have an accepted offer, if they say, look, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, your roof is falling down, or there's termite issues, or this wall that you want to open up, it's not as easy to do so. You would need to get a $5,000 steel beam. So there's a lot of hidden costs when you scratch beneath the surface. So those are definitely things we would advise.
And Ben pretty much hit that spot on. So I have nothing
next
really
question.
to add.
So actually, I wanted to elaborate on that, because when you mentioned, when you get the structural survey done, and if there is something that kind of comes up from that particular survey, so as the buyer, do I have some type of negotiation wiggle room to kind of say, hey, this was found, but I quoted you at $900,000, but the work that is gonna now be needing is like $100,000. So can we bring this down? Like, how do we go about that conversation? Because even when Dan mentioned, like, shooting your shot in real estate is definitely scary.
So something like that could also be reflected in the value
Okay.
the property. So
That would be the seller's argument.
yeah.
They would say, I know it needs work and that's why it's priced the way it is, but
Okay.
it is a renegotiation point. You know, depending on how, if it's just cosmetic things, you know, obviously the bathroom needs renovating or something, that is
Understandable, but it's something that messes with the actual integrity of the
safety
property.
for the
safety.
inhabitants, then definitely a buyer.
Yeah, and
Okay.
it depends it depends on what state you planned on buying the property. Like if you knew you was buying a fixer upper, it's a fixer upper. You sort of anticipated, expected that you know everything would be to a certain level. But if you're buying a property that looks in good marketable condition, and then you go get the structural survey and it's got these issues, then you're gonna have some, you know, you have a little bit of more legs to stand on.
Yeah. We've been advising some sellers now, and because it is so competitive and to not lose out on the deal, to actually get a structural survey themselves before listing it. Now, these surveys, you know, they're based on the cost per square foot. The different engineers will do different things.
1,500 to 25.
So it's
depending,
expensive to do it, but you might save yourself because often a seller might not be aware that they had an infestation of termites in the roof or whatever it might be. So if they can actually remedy those issues beforehand, and then if there is an acceptance and the buyer wants to hire their own surveyor, they can say, oh, no, we've already taken care of this or that, or they've had it tented or whatever it might be. So, but it is a cost, but you could potentially save on the back end. So
for sure.
That's one thing I can say. Just having this conversation with you guys, I'm realizing that it's not. It is literally more than just buying and selling. Like you just can't say, "Okay, I want to put my home on the market," and just let the best person pick it.
A lot of
and
layers too.
It's definitely a lot of layers. And so, speaking of millennials, one thing we do want to do is own property. What are some like good first time purchase properties to look at? Like what's the size? What are like some of the things one can maybe start to think about when they're thinking about their first time purchase?
So, I mean, I'll take this one just for the jump. But I would say it really depends where you're at in your life yourself. But I would say and to steal some of Ben's quotes, you usually buy a few homes, right? So you have your first
lifetime.
in your lifetime. You have your first home, then you have your family home, and then you have your sort of retiree home. With the first home, if you're a single guy, say myself, I would be looking at probably like a condo or something.
is that an advertisement for yourself?
Perhaps.
Shoot your shot, ladies.
Yeah. All about shooting the shot.
Shooting your shot with the offer, with me, whatever. But I would be looking at a condo or something that's easily attainable, you know, so I can get onto the property ladder. Because once you get onto the property ladder, then you can start to build and you can start to maneuver up. Now, if you're married and, you know, you need a little bit more space, you have a kid or whatever the case may be, and you have more disposable income because it's two people working towards something, then, you know, then you can look to. So it all really depends. I would say always try to have an apartment. If you are going for a house, try to have an apartment that can help, you know, just help support the mortgage payments, or if you know you're doing mortgage payments. And yeah, that would be my sort of advice.
Yeah. I would say in the long run, houses hold their value more than condos, depending on the amenities and which condo development. So definitely a house would be the way to go. And the silly saying of location, location, location is so incredibly true. You know, I'd rather be in the smallest, most affordable house on the street than the nicest, biggest, most fancy house on the street in terms of comparable values, because that is what appraisers and buyers are going to look at when they see the potential. And if they want to put money into a house, you want to look at the neighborhood and what's around you.
When we think about renos and like, you know, reaching out to different people like yourselves, y'all cost. You're not cheap. You don't do this for free. It's not volunteer work.
Well, in a way, that's a myth.
Yeah, that's a myth.
Okay, let's dispel that, because, you know, I'm thinking when I get people that are going to be helping me with my first time property, there is an exchange for that. So like, do you guys offer, you know, pro bono services for people?
I just wrote up a document last night that was a pro bono thing for someone. They had me go to their property earlier this week, and they want to do an extension on their house and do a 2-bedroom apartment. It's got a lot of potential, and the bank actually only just needed an opinion of value. They didn't need an appraisal. So for no cost, you know, I know the person decently, but not well at all, really. And so I just did up a report and signed the document, and, you know, was happy to do so. You know, real estate is ultimately all about relationships. If you take care of people and relationships and, good word of mouth, Bermuda's a small place, it's like a high school, then commission will always take care of it. Commission will take care of itself in the end. But if you're a buyer and you're working with an agent, you tell them kind of what your, criteria are, it's probably 95% of transactions, it's the seller who pays the commission. So it is free in a sense for a buyer to go through that journey and for an agent to do the research and help them through it.
Yeah, and just further to Ben's point, that's often a common misconception. It's like who you have to reach out to. So if you feel comfortable with a particular agent, you can reach out to them and bounce stuff off of them to sort of get to your end goal and say, this is my buying criteria, this is what I'm looking for, these are the boxes I need ticked. Can you help me? Can you send me some stuff? And then you sort of want to stay, not sort of, but you want to stay exclusive to that person unless they let you down in a sense, because they're not getting paid until a sale happens, right? And so they're putting in a lot of work on this side and the back end, and it's one of those things where you sort of just want to, don't go shop around with everyone, Okay. So if this is your agent, that's your agent. Same way if that's your lawyer, that's your lawyer. That's the person you go to when you are thinking about property.
So much great information, obviously, so far. We're going to take another quick commercial break, and then we'll be back with this episode of The Sovereign Life. Make sure you do not go anywhere because we have way more real estate misconceptions to unfold for you all.
We'll be right back after these messages. You're watching The Sovereign Life with Teresa Stewart on Channel 82.
Welcome back to this episode of The Sovereign Life. I am joined by Daniel Woods. We did lose Ben Rigo. He had to, run off because the game of Monopoly, real estate is as we mentioned, it's actually a great market right now.
Always be closing. ABC. So I think he ran off to a sale or something like that.
The ABCs of real estate. Yeah. I love to hear it. So earlier, Dan, you mentioned group economics. Yeah. And so before we dive into that a little bit deeper, I want to talk about what types of properties are great to do group economics for, like commercial and real estate?
It could be commercial or residential. If it's going to be residential, I'd say probably the best way to go about it is you always want to have an exit strategy. Mm-hmm. So with commercial, you have an exit strategy. It's just commercial property generally, so it's more business savvy, business sense. Mm-hmm. But if I was to do residential, it would be apartments. So something like 4 apartments, a triplex, or something like that. That could probably easily be split up or broken up in a certain way. But yeah, so that's the avenue that I would take.
That's perfect. And so we talk about teams a lot as millennials. We do know that, if everyone stays in their lane, we can actually get
100%,
further.
100%.
So who are some people that if you were to do whether commercial or residential buy, who are some people you want to kind of have in that initial group to make sure that it's a successful purchase?
So from my point of view, you always want to have someone, lawyer is where it comes. That's the starting point with most things. Just because property, any sort of business venture is going to require certain legal expertise to make sure that everything's working out properly. On top of that, then you're going to need people with hands-on skill sets. So, you're going to want someone who, understands masonry, understands, can be a Mr. Fix-It, can work on the hands and can direct and, take someone like me who doesn't know much about, the hands-on stuff, but could take me and say, hey, Daniel, do this here, do this here, do this here. And so get the ball rolling. But those would be the two main ones, and then you just need more so funding and backing so people can understand the numbers, project management, people just with the skill set of organization and can really just work together in a team. But it all comes down to trust and knowing who you're getting into business with. So if you're working with a team of 4 and someone's got outstanding debt from this or something like that, you want to have all your cards up front so nothing's actually surprising you later in the game.
And so even talking about the funding idea, so if you're doing it as a group, you all are putting your personal finance out there.
Ideally, it really depends. Every situation will be different. It depends how things are going to get structured. Some people might be able to get in with sweat equity. Other people might have the capital and not really have the know-how or want to be hands-on. They might just want to make it as an investment. So it really depends on where each person's coming from and who you have on your team. So, every situation is different. So it's tough to really say, but in a perfect world, everyone has skin in the game.
Right. And so when we're purchasing our first piece of property, we talked about appraisals earlier. And so one of the things I kind of wanted to dive in a little bit more on is how important is it to have not only the appraisal but the structural survey if it's required? Because we know that, the older homes would generally probably require some work. So, but the average millennial, when they're thinking about the home ownership process or even any property ownership process, we're just thinking about the purchase. That's it. So how important is it for the things like the renovation that could come down the line to have an appraisal? And like, what are some of the things we should be looking for in those processes, like in the actual appraisal or the survey?
So what you want to see is sort of get an idea of where with the appraisal, you're going to get a good idea of where the market's at, and you can get a great idea of, especially if you try to squeeze as much knowledge from the appraiser as possible about the area, about the neighborhood, about other sales, about everything that's happening, on the market at the time being. And then also, reach out to them to see where the value in your property might lie, So if you have development potential on the west side of your house, or, or if you fix up the windows and doors, it would help out in this sense. New flooring and, certain things will just add great value to a property. If you add a pool, then it has this, it can, skyrocket this. So little things like that, where you can get a good idea of what's really going to add value to the property. Because at the end of the day, any renovations you want to do, yes, you want to fit things out to exactly how you want them, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it's sort of going to add value, that it's going to add value to the property. A lot of things can be very specialized. From what I noticed when we guys go in and inspect properties, can be very specialized. So not everyone's going to want gold, sink taps or something like that. So you want to make things as basically anyone can walk off the street and say, oh, I like this, and they can envision the property as their own, versus, it being so specialized to this is exactly what this person likes.
Right.
So have that in the back of your head no matter what property you're doing.
And then, so is it typical for the appraiser to like be able to give you that information around like the potential of your home? Because when you purchase a home, you kind of just think of it, okay, well, this is it and that's that. Like, so should you be coming in with some of these questions already ready to go?
I mean, you sort of, it's one of those things where it's like necessarily it probably wouldn't get put down on the report unless you're doing something in the sense of we have reports that are done up. So if you was going to go and get renovations done and you already had all of your paperwork and your plans and your fit outs and stuff like that, we would do a sort of, we call them a before and after, but like a as is and upon completion appraisal. So we're saying this is what the property is right now in its current state, but if they do these works that they have outlined and given us these supporting documentation for it, then this is what the property could be worth once this is all finished. So it's like, a before and after appraisal. So they do these works, this is what it could be valued at. So yes, you want to have those questions in mind, but when you're actually ready to go, that's when you want to reach out for that type of appraisal, and then we can give you a clear picture that's documented that you can use with the banks to probably support getting, a home equity loan or construction loan or whatever the case may be.
Now, you mentioned a lawyer earlier as being good for your group economic situation. Now, how important is having a lawyer on deck if it's just like, an individual?
I think it's absolutely, it's basically.
Because it's not required, right?
I'm pretty sure a lawyer is required for any transfer of title. So if land's going from myself to you, or my mom to me, it's going to require a stamp.
Right. Okay.
Sort, right. Like the stamp duty is going to be collected on that no matter what. If it's going to be stamped, that means it's going to be stamped in deed or it's going to be stamped in some legal documentation. So having a lawyer, it's usually a scaled conveyancing fee for property transactions. So they are in line with like the Bermuda Bar Association. But generally speaking, you want to have a lawyer, a good lawyer who you can reach out to, who knows your property, who knows your ins and outs. And I'd say like the same way how you want to have your own real estate agent, that is your real estate agent working on your corner, and anytime that you have real estate needs, you're going to them. You sort of want to have the same sense with a lawyer. You sort of want to have the same sense with your banker. Those are the type of things that, especially back in the day, that's how, a lot of business was based off of relationships. And that's how people was able to build up their levels of wealth, by just having, this is my guy who does this is my guy who does that, this is my guy who does that. And I think that's sort of, we've become so transactional as a millennial culture. It's just, we want it now, we want this now, I can do it over the phone. So that relationship aspect isn't necessarily there, but I think it would actually pay off great dividends if we was able to bring it back.
So speaking of relationships, because what I wanted to, you just touched on it, millennials are very transactional. So how do we as millennials get people like that in our corner? Because okay, I have you now as a resource, but how do I get to the next level of having a lawyer in my space? Do I just come to you and say, hey, Daniel?
Yeah, and there will be, I know Ben probably has 5 lawyers that he would say, these are lawyers that I've previously done professional relationships with. He's not going to probably say one specifically, and he's going to say, go meet or talk to these people and get your vibe from them. And then you can do the same along the banking lines. I mean, I'm not gonna say Bermuda is very who you know, but it essentially it comes down to that. And then recommendations, and as Ben was speaking on earlier, word of mouth, So you want to find out at whatever bank that you're dealing with who you want to be dealing with and who you feel comfortable with and who you think has your best interests. So that's the best answer I can give for that one.
That's perfect. And so earlier we talked about property being a way to transfer wealth within us. Estate planning is something that we as millennials are not thinking about right now, or some of us are not thinking about it right now because we think that's so far down the timeline for us. But how important is it for us to start thinking about it now? And then how does property kind of enter that estate planning plan?
So I think us as millennials, although we're not necessarily thinking about it now with property that we might own, I think it needs to be a greater conversation around, say, families and homesteads and all of those type of those environments. I find that the conversations, especially within our community, we don't necessarily have the conversations of, the parents don't share finances and details and all of those inner works of what's going on and exactly where we're at with our kids, especially as our kids grow older. Once you're in college, you should have a better idea of all right, I know my mom's stressing over this because of this. And you should, once you have that picture painted clearly to you, a lot of times parents try to shield it. But once that picture is painted clearly to you, then you have a better understanding, a better appreciation, and in full, you make better decisions and guide yourself and act accordingly. So I think by sharing, is a will set up, is a trust set up, and trying to actually work towards those goals, reinvesting in the homestead and trying to get onto your homestead's deeds. That might be, more attainable, and then that you can use that equity against to start your own wealth, So those type of things, just those conversations, always uncomfortable, but need to be had, because what happens is someone passes away and they haven't set up the foundation for those, now everyone's got to go and figure it out. We're very reactive opposed to proactive. So if these conversations are had before those tough times happen and you bring in the lawyers and, you get your trust sorted out and all of that type of stuff sorted out, it just makes a smoother process, and it saves a lot of family arguments, a lot of family bickering, and, a lot of things can turn bad. I've seen it myself, and, a lot of things can turn bad with different situations. So you can eliminate that by sort of trying to have those conversations now. And then as millennials, if we can put more into improving our homestead or improving, helping out with the mortgage or whatever the case is at your family home, then it's going to allow you to set yourself up for later down the road. So, I don't know, just sharing.
That's a great share. And so just to elaborate a little bit more on that, go a little bit further, as millennials, what is some of the first things we can do? Let's say we do want to own property, but we don't have the capital right now. So we're just going to say, okay, we're not going to try to buy our home ourselves. You just mentioned, putting into the current homestead. How do we open that conversation with the generation above? Because that's what you said, it's uncomfortable. We know it's uncomfortable.
Show them this episode or something like that. Or what usually works, and what usually works, I would say, is probably something of having neutral parties that are respected, like a mediator in a sense, to come facilitate sort of, bring everyone to the table and have a trusted person that could sort of, you can lay out all of the cards and sort of say XYZ, XYZ, this is what we're looking to do. Create a plan, right? If you have that's the one thing that parents sort of want to see, or I say parents, but people want to see, is that you have a plan. So if you have a plan of, this is how I'm trying to get to where I'm trying to go, this is how I'd like to do it. I would like to go this route first, and this route involves you. If that route doesn't work, I'm still going to get to my plan, but it's going to be a tougher situation for me. So if you can help by all means. Try to make it appeal, right? Put together a proposal and say, this is what I'm trying to do. And then by all means, bring in someone comfortable to really just lay out the cards, and so they can sort of be a little bit neutral and just say, oh, this is a good point, and make sure that everything's sort of being communicated effectively.
That's perfect, because one thing I wanted to talk about as well is we know that the previous generations may have had some issues with finding finances, or possibly thinking that the finances were secure and they weren't secure, or they weren't as secure as they thought they were. So how can we as millennials, because we know that we're going to at some point probably have to go to the bank and go through that approval process and get the funds that way, but how can we avoid some of the mistakes that I think our parents and our grandparents made when it came to purchasing their home and the funding surrounding it? Because we've heard some horror stories where, they were only paying the interest towards their mortgage, and they thought their mortgage would have been done in 2010, but they actually got another 20 years to go before they actually can pay it off.
So I would say, it all comes down to reading the terms and conditions, creating a paper trail, having a clear understanding. And, at the way you have to look at it is banks or whoever the private lending institution is, they're working for you. You're essentially paying them. So ask questions, get it clear. If you don't understand something, ask those questions. Don't just take it on face value a lot of times, which is like, we're scared to ask questions, or we, feel like we're going to be bothering someone. Get a clear understanding of exactly what your position is, how things are laid out. And it also will take due diligence on your own part to go and do your homework. If there's a topic or something about this, something that you don't quite understand, reach out to people around you, or in this day and age, YouTube, Google, Twitter, whatever the case may be, you can get educated on certain topics like that. So
I appreciate that answer, because as millennials, we definitely will take control of it if we have the access to the information. Yeah. And earlier you mentioned around when you're valuing the home, there are other things that come into it, like the neighborhood. And so how important is it for us to look at the neighborhood as well as the property itself? And how does that actually play into it? Because one would think that where I live is a great neighborhood because that's the neighborhood that I'm a part of, but there might be better neighborhoods for me given my current circumstance that I might not be aware of. So how does one start to do that particular research? Did you just go out and drive around and see what's out there?
So there's access to, a lot of times residential sales are based on what's selling in the market. So it's comparable sales. So we look at essentially what this property that's very similar to this property sell for, here, or what did it sell for there? And then we measure, we say, all right, well, this one has this one doesn't. And then that's how we essentially come to certain values. Mm-hmm. So you'll see in certain areas or parishes or whatever the case may be, that certain properties will sell at this range and certain properties will sell at this range. So what it comes down to is what a willing buyer and a willing seller are willing to agree on. Mm-hmm. And so it's, the information is accessible through land registry mm-hmm. office, but at the same time, it's more of just having an understanding of where people want to be situated and for what reasons, So I think in one of our episodes, we was talking about, the unique parishes of St. George's and Somerset. And it's, quite clear that, people from Somerset want to live in Somerset. It's not everyone's cup of tea. And you have traffic that you have to deal with. There's certain elements that, play factors into why a property would be at this and why a property would be at that. So I know I don't necessarily answer your question, but it sort of gives a broad
because I
brush.
think one of the things we tend to outside of the, intrinsic reasons as to why I love my parish over another parish, some of the things we don't consider with the buying and selling of a property are some of these indirect things that are not necessarily a part of your property itself, but they do kind of change your way of life. Your lifestyle does change. So some of those things do get factored in. That's kind of what I wanted to dive into, because as millennials, we do have certain things that we want. Like, if I want to be able to get to my job really fast, that means the property that I'm looking at needs to either be in that same parish, or I need to be able to have access to that, my job in an easy way.
Yeah, so it's definitely those factors. Then you have in the lot sizes, so the size of the property and the size of the properties, the lots of the properties around it. So residential 1, residential 2, what else is nearby. So if you're by a heavy roadway or something like that, like it's like a bunch of different factors that you have to always look at your property from someone who didn't grow up there, from someone who's just, walking off the street and saying, I want to buy this property. What are they going to like about it? What are they not going to like about it? Why? And so that's sort of where we put our hats in. And then we say, all right, what else is sold? What's sold next door? How much did that sell for in comparison to other places? And then you get a good sense of, where your neighborhood or your property might be at.
You mentioned lot size, and so I know that what that kind of technically means. It's the lot, the physical land.
Yeah, so it's just
so in the real estate space, like, how do you see people interested in just purchasing land itself, like not necessarily purchasing a structure? And how is the process similar or different if you're just trying to buy land?
So if you're just trying to buy land, the process is very similar. It's what you plan to do with the land. You find a lot of people just trying to buy land, but the issue is Bermuda, 22 square miles. How many open lots, vacant lots do you see of land just lying around? Not many, right? So when they do pop up, there's not as many transactions, but when they do pop up, you do have people that want to just go ahead and build their dream home. If the lot ticks the right boxes, let's say it's waterfront, let's say it's in this neighborhood, or it will attract a lot of buyers. And then it's the case of what are you able to do with that lot of land? So it comes down to what the zoning is. So, a lot of land that's zoned industrial, you can't go build your dream home on industrial land. A lot of land that's zoned, something else, it has limitations. So that's what it comes down to generally.
And that's interesting, because I have heard the term zoning and all of that good jazz, but besides that, that's all I knew. And I think it's interesting to know that on industrial land, I cannot build a home.
No.
But it's land. Like, it's land. One would think that you should have that option. But I wanted to talk about commercial and residential properties. And, like, is there more benefit to maybe starting your first property ownership as it being commercial? Or should you be looking at residential as your first property?
That's a tough one. That would probably lean more on the economics of Bermuda's current position. So it depends. Property is only as valuable as what you can do with it. So if you have in mind, you have to basically weigh out the pros and cons.
Right.
Right now, a lot of people are looking for a place to live. And people always need a place to live. A lot of people are working from home. So, you really have to weigh it out. But in a sense, it's to each their own. You know, it depends what your appetite is at that point. But I don't think I could sway one way or another.
Right.
But it leans on a lot of macro effects of where Bermuda is at right now.
I think that's interesting, because just obviously we know we live in an economy, so it's just we all have an individual role to play in the economy, and real estate is now becoming, I think Ben mentioned it earlier, like a big part of what we're all talking about, not only as millennials, but just the world in general, because we understand that it is a really great asset to have, whether it's commercial or residential. But so from the perspective of the first-time home buyer millennial that is trying to understand how it's beneficial to have a piece of property, whether it is the starter home, the family home, or the retirement home, like, how do we kind of change the conversation for them? Because I've heard a lot of millennials, self-included, where they're thinking like, you know what, maybe I don't want to buy a property because it's so much that seems to go into purchasing it. So how do we encourage them to at least start a process of property ownership?
I mean, I'd say essentially it's one of those things where it's like you have to, the earlier you start, the better position you'll be. Property is one of those things that you can pass on. It's something that you're always going to have. You can touch it, so it's tangible. It's something you can see. It's a place to live. You're always going to need a place to live in your life. And so I would say, and it's also not as out of reach as a lot of people like to think. Yes, it's not. I'm not going to say Bermuda. I'm not going to say Bermuda probably has the best, structure and process by any means. But at the same time, anything worth getting is going to have a couple hoops to go through. So I would say just keep in mind that it's not out of reach, and but you do have to plan, and you do have to reach out and talk to people and really get your ducks in a row to, make it happen.
So from your recent clients, like I'm assuming, what age range do you typically see with like property?
I mean, a lot of property owners are usually in the boomer years, I'd say.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then for us as millennials, like what are some of the key things we should be looking at if we wanted to get our first home or our first property purchase? Because we know that, we all have our own thing that we want to happen, our dream home. But like, what are some of the key things we can look at to see a property as being a great purchase? Because I feel like we tend to just look at what we see on the outside or the neighborhood that we're in. But what are some other key factors we should be kind of considering in our like decision on figuring out which one we want to go with?
Well, I think you want to have sort of a few different varying perspectives to how you would approach any property. So you want to have, I always like to think you want to have an exit strategy. So by having an exit strategy, you want to consider how much, if you're not living in this property, can I rent it? If I can rent it, how much am I going to be renting in that? If I'm not going to live in this property and I need to sell it for any reason, how fast can I sell it, and what price do you think it will be sold at? So having that in the back of your head definitely makes your approach easier, because you can always have that as the card to play at the last option. You definitely want to try to have an income producing apartment attached to it. And even if you have to sort of try to create one or whatever the case is, that's something, because that's just, you can create consistent rental value from that. And then I'd say, a lot of things just really come down to generally like location, size. You want to make sure it's probably not too overdeveloped, development potential, so if you're buying a property and if it's still got a little bit of land where you can go and build onto that, or you can build up, or you can add, whatever you want to do with it. That's something that's always just, great.
We've talked a lot about development. Like you just mentioned, like, the opportunity to maybe add an income to a home if you don't necessarily have it when you first purchase it. What is the process like to do that? Because we have talked about, the home buying process is not, as simple, as fast as transactional millennials would like it to be. But like, how involved is that process to actually develop on a property?
So everything will be subject to planning approval. So Department of Planning and Government would be the way to sort of go. That process takes time, but if you sort of know exactly what you want from jump, and you can maneuver everything, so you have all of your, I keep on saying ducks in a row, I don't know why.
It's the term of the day. I love it.
But that's generally sort of what you need, right? Like, because that's what causes a lot of holdups, generally speaking, when you're trying to buy a property, sell a property, you're trying to go and get planning permits. So it's when you don't have all of your information collated and put together at the right time and presented well. That's when you sort of always get the kickbacks, and then things take longer and longer and longer. So if you have an idea of exactly what you want to do, then you want to reach out to your architects and see what's manageable. Then you want to reach out to your contractors, get your quotes. Then you want to go and start to apply for the planning permit. And as you're doing that, you want to go and get the financing for it. So everything, it all happens at once, but you want to have your ducks in a row. So, yeah.
I love that. And so we did touch on it earlier around like the documents and make sure you have everything that you need to like even start your bank approval process. So like, what are like the key documents that we need if I want to go to approach the bank tomorrow? And I want to get started. What is like the key documents that I need to make sure I have before I can say I'm ready?
I think a lot of the processes can be started online at this point, but generally speaking, I think you need to show proof that you're Bermudian. You want to show all of your basically your bank accounts, and especially where your income streams are coming into. So proof of your incomes. Then they'll see proof of expenditures, vice versa. And then what else? I feel like I'm missing a passport to show you're Bermudian, and some utility bills or something like that. Yeah, so
like the basics that you would need to start any account is basically what you need to
essentially, like so,
apply for the loans.
And then they'll report back to you if in a very short timeline. I think some banks are doing 48 hours, others probably up to a week, but they'll report back to you with sort of where you stand.
Okay.
And so, but then I would also say, even though you can do that online, set up the meeting, so you can build a relationship, because that's just how life works.
Right.
At the end of the day, life works by building relationships.
Absolutely.
And so, if your banker has a better understanding of exactly where you're coming from, who you are, what you're dealing with, they're going to tend to sort of probably fight a little bit harder for you versus someone that's just applied online. They don't have any sort of can't put a face in there.
I think that's a sound recommendation, because I think as millennials, we talked about it previously, we're so transactional, we're so used to things being done through the computer and just being like, okay, I'm done, let's move on to the next thing. And I think it's really important that you mentioned that we should be focused on building relationships, because if we don't do that, we might not ever actually be able to even, get that loan pushed through.
And even certain things like that, the person that you're dealing with at the bank they can guide you on workarounds or other ways and stuff like that that might not, you're not going to see on the company website. So yeah, handshakes go a long way, or fist bumps in this day and age, I should say.
Yeah, fist bump or elbow bump, really, because we want to keep our physical distance, keep the bubbles as tight as we can. I want to thank you, Daniel, for joining me today for this episode of The Sovereign Life. If you enjoyed this content, do make sure, as Daniel mentioned, that you share it with someone in your family, someone that you know, because this type of information needs to be talked about, as Daniel mentioned, as well, as often as it can be. And we will see you in another episode.
You've been watching The Sovereign Life. Hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks for watching.